Welcome. My name is Cynthia Grooms-Katz, and I am the chairperson of the webinar committee of the American Immigration Lawyers Association, DC, Washington, D.C. chapter. Today we are presenting a webinar for law enforcement on prosecuting immigration services fraud. We have a panel of experts hosted by Annie Schäufele, and we have several visual presentations to augment each panelist. Thank you so much. Annie, please take it away.
Thank you, Cynthia, and thank you for everyone who's listening in to this presentation and to the panelists for participating, and thanks to our co-sponsors of this event, which include the American Immigration Lawyers Association DC chapter and National Consumer Protection Committee, the American Bar Association Commission on Immigration and Criminal Justice section, and the nonprofit Ayuda. So Ayuda is the nonprofit I work for, where I do direct representation of immigrant victims of notario fraud. And what I've seen with my colleagues at AILA is that there's a real need for additional representation, and the lack of legal services has unfortunately created a perfect environment for unscrupulous non-attorneys to take advantage and prey on vulnerable communities. Currently, we have about 14,000 members of the American Immigration Lawyers Association, and we know that every year U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services receives and adjudicates an estimated 6 million petitions and applications. So just by the math of those numbers, we can recognize that all of the petitions and applications submitted are not with applicants receiving representation because there aren't enough attorneys to go around. And so unfortunately we have what we call immigration services fraud or notario fraud, which is really an umbrella term for a lot of different issues in our community, which include false claims to be an attorney, government impersonators, so-called multiservicios, where there's tax preparation, travel agency, real estate agency, all in one place. And also notario fraud, where we have websites that even charge applicants to receive application forms that would be free on the USCIS website, and also non-lawyers associating with absentee, dishonest, incompetent, or disbarred attorneys. When fraud occurs, the reason it matters for us is because of the harm it can cause consumers. So we have seen consumers who've lost $60 and consumers who've lost $20,000. And the effects on their immigration case can be much more severe. So this really goes beyond a deceptive financial crime and really becomes a crime that can have life-altering consequences, including deportation. On our side, immigration lawyers are really limited in their abilities to take systemic action. And so we're looking to partner with law enforcement and civil attorneys to take action against these providers. And sometimes we do that by approaching the agencies and reporting these crimes. And so we're really lucky today to have experts from the field to discuss their cases that they've taken across the country, to discuss the civil and criminal remedies that they utilize and some of the tactics that have helped them be successful in their respective areas. Just to provide a roadmap of what we'll be discussing, first we'll hear from our federal partners, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services and the Federal Trade Commission, and then we'll take a tour of prosecutions around the country, from Los Angeles to Manhattan to Texas to Maryland. At the end, we should have about 20 minutes for questions, and if there are additional questions that have not been answered on the webinar, we would ask that you email those to annes@ayuda.com. To start, we'll have Debra Rogers from U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. Debra Rogers serves as Deputy Associate Director at USCIS's Customer Service and Public Engagement Directorate. Ms. Rogers has held a variety of operational and managerial positions in offices across the U.S., including Boston, Washington, D.C., and San Diego, and will discuss the agency's work around immigration services fraud. And without further ado, Ms. Rogers, you're up.
Great. Thank you so much, Annie. I appreciate the kind introduction. And good afternoon, everyone. First, I would like to start off by just thanking AILA, ABA, Ayuda for inviting us to this important webinar and partnering with us on this important issue. It's a real honor for me to be part of this discussion on prosecuting immigration services scams. Immigration services scams are a serious national problem. They exploit the vulnerabilities of immigrants, refugees, students, and others, including U.S. citizens. An advancement in technology means that these scams are also getting more sophisticated and advanced. Just last week, our office received an email from a customer regarding this very issue. We encourage the public to email our webmaster if they have any suspicious emails that they believe to be a scam. This individual received an email informing him that his application had been received by USCIS and his documents were being processed. But in order to continue the process and to have his visa issued, he needed to pay an additional filing fee of $420. The email entwined real facts and real government websites with fabrications and misinformation, deliberately intending to deceive the reader. Toward the end of the email, he was instructed to pay the filing application fee through Western Union via a money transfer. According to the email, it was necessary to do this to avoid delays. His application was threatened to be withdrawn if payment was not made, and was given a very, very short deadline to receive the money. Thankfully, the stakeholder did not make the Western Union money order to Thailand, but instead reached out to us. Unfortunately, many others are not so lucky. We hear stories of unsuspecting victims paying scammers thousands of dollars to Western Union or to MoneyGram. Other variations would include receiving fake emails about winning the lottery, the diversity visa lottery. Many request sending money to certain websites and never receiving an immigration benefit. The benefits that our customers are seeking, they're critical and often life-changing. The laws that govern benefits are incredibly complex, and our customers want to comply with the requirements and will go to great lengths to get through the immigration process successfully. This places them in a particularly vulnerable position when it comes to becoming a victim of fraud. Combating these schemes is a high priority for USCIS. We are committed to educating and warning applicants about immigration scams and ensuring that applicants know how to find qualified legal advice and assistance in completing and submitting forms to USCIS. We are also committed to providing the very best information on our website and in all our public education materials and presenting it in a way that is clear and easy to understand. We firmly believe that we reduce the risk of immigration scams when individuals seeking information see USCIS and other government entities as a trusted source for information, where they can get the information they need, file their applications, and track their progress with confidence. I hope you find all the information presented in this webinar useful. You are all critical partners in our effort to combat fraud. The more we are aligned and informed, the better we serve our customers and protect the integrity of the immigration process. I'd like to now introduce my colleague, Mary Herman, who is the Chief of our Public Engagement Directorate, who will provide some more specific information on our efforts to combat immigration services fraud.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Debbie. And thank you again also to everyone hosting the webinar today. So I'll start by talking a little bit about the history of our UPIL initiative, or our Unauthorized Practice of Immigration Law initiative. The initiative here at USCIS is about 5 years old. We launched back in June of 2011, and since then it's grown into our Avoid Scams initiative, which includes, of course, more than just UPIL. Our initiative is comprised of 3 pillars, which are public education, capacity building, and enforcement. Over the course of the last nearly 5 years, we've hosted almost 2,700 national and local engagements, and we've reached out to over 140,000 individuals with the intent of raising awareness within local communities and equipping those applicants with information that they need to protect themselves from those who might be engaging in this incredibly deceptive practice. We are committed to protecting immigrants and the immigration process from these scams. We at USCIS and DHS writ large have partnered with the Justice Department and the Federal Trade Commission, as well as state and local agencies, many who are on today's webinar, with the intent to enforce, educate, and collaborate in an effort to stop immigration scams and assist in prosecuting those who are responsible. We've continued to engage with our federal partners in order to share information through the use of FTC's Consumer Sentinel Scam reporting system. I'm sure Tom Carter is going to talk about that as well. We want to identify and alert stakeholders when there are recent scams that are targeting the immigrant community. We are often one of the first to hear when there are scams, and they come to us by a variety of means. And once we know about it, we definitely want to get out word to our customers and stakeholders so that they can be wary of it. And we also want to identify collaborative outreach opportunities to raise the visibility of the recognition and accreditation process so that we can build capacity in underserved communities. I'd also like to talk about the role that USCIS, specifically our Fraud Detection and National Security Directorate, or FDNS, has in immigration scams. When it is discovered that an individual has been victimized via a scam, especially a scam where USCIS is used as the protagonist, for example, a telephone scam, FDNS is very much proactive in referring these cases to our Office of Security and Integrity for review and action. Typically, that action will include, but is definitely not limited to, a full investigation by the Office of Security and Integrity in partnership with other federal law enforcement entities, or by referring the case to the DHS Inspector General's office for follow-up. Where there are situations where an individual poses as an attorney or provides sham legal services or other bogus services to a client or, unfortunately, a victim, we'll work with other federal, state, and local partner organizations, including law enforcement agencies and the FTC, to identify the perpetrators and assist in bringing them to justice. Could you move to the next slide, please? Great, thank you. But our primary efforts remain focused on the education part of the initiative. We have 2 websites where we provide tips on how to avoid common immigration scams, how to find qualified legal assistance, and a resource center with more information. You can find these at uscis.gov/avoid-scams, and there's also a parallel Spanish site, uscis.gov/evite-estafas. Thank you to my translator. The content on the Avoid Scam site is updated frequently. Most of our public education materials are available in 15 languages, including this week. We just, as of this month, we added Hindi to the list of languages that we also have materials available in. The Avoid Scams website also has a page on reporting immigration scams that includes information on how to report a scam to the FTC, as well as how to file a complaint locally. We encourage stakeholders to do both, and because reporting a scam will not affect their immigration application or petition, and we also want to highlight that many states do allow anonymous reporting. The website also has a table with information on where to report scams in every state, as well as a link to that state's consumer protection laws. We want to encourage the various law enforcement officials who are on today's webinar to take the scams, especially as more laws are being passed on the state and local level. The strength of our collective enforcement effort rests largely on the work of these state and local law enforcement agencies. At USCIS, we're committed to continuing to our efforts to investigate immigration scams. However, most of the scams involve cases where immigrants or their U.S. citizen family members have been scammed without an application or petition actually being filed with USCIS. So in these situations, as with all consumer protection cases, state and local law enforcement play a critical role in investigating and prosecuting scammers to protect the immigrant community and to deter any potential future immigration scams. All right.
All right. Thank you so much. So we're going to transition now to the Federal Trade Commission. I'm going to go ahead and stop showing my screen and then pull up the Federal Trade Commission's PowerPoint. And while I'm doing that, I want to go ahead and let all of the folks who are on the phone but may have colleagues who haven't been able to log on know that the presentation is being recorded, and so it will be available after the fact on the ABA's Fight Notario Fraud and the AILA's Stop Notario Fraud websites. And in addition, we are going to hopefully be able to now have the full screen showing for the PowerPoints. But Tom Carter is going to be up next, and so I am hopefully, now you are all seeing his PowerPoint presentation. Tom Carter is a senior attorney in the FTC's Southwest Regional Office in Dallas. Mr. Carter is the national coordinator of the FTC's initiative to combat immigration services scams. In his 28-year tenure at the FTC, Carter has also concentrated on combating abusive debt collection, health fraud, business opportunity scams, credit repair swindles, telemarketing fraud, including robocallers, and fraud across international borders. We're really grateful to Tom for his expertise on this panel.
Great, thank you so much. So hopefully we're seeing the PowerPoint presentation. The only thing that's important about that first one is I got to tell you that the views I'm about to express are my own and not necessarily those of the FTC, its staff, or any individual commissioner. We're ready for the second slide. All right, second slide. There we go. Okay. First, just a couple of words about the Federal Trade Commission generally. We're a lot smaller than many people think. We're an independent federal agency with just 1,100 employees. It's a pretty small federal agency, but it's a pretty big law firm because most of us are lawyers. We also have investigators and economists. We have obviously our home office in D.C., but also 7 regional offices around the country. I, as has been described, work out of our Dallas office, Southwest region, and many regional offices have very important roles. As you've heard, they allowed us to control and to run the Immigration Services Scam Initiative. So we appreciate that. And consumer protection is our mission. What we think of when we think of FTC is for the consumer. And important for this call, immigrants are consumers. In fact, anyone filing for benefits with USCIS in the United States is considered a consumer. So we're out there for you. You can have the next slide. Generally, our enforcement authority comes from the Federal Trade Commission Act and a myriad of other statutes, Fair Credit Reporting, Fair Credit Billing, Fair Debt Collection Practice Act, lots of other statutes. But the one that's mainly important to us, and particularly for immigration services scams, is our Section 5. And if you can go to the next slide, we like to think of Section 5.
Sorry.
Is it coming up?
It seems to be very slow, but let me make sure. I'm going to go ahead and, yep.
When it comes up, you'll get the joke. We consider Section 5 as the long arm of the law. Basically, Section 5 of the FTC Act says that it makes unfair methods of competition or unfair or deceptive acts or practices affecting commerce illegal. There it is. There's the long arm of the law. And what that means is we have broad authority. If you advertise, market, or sell anything in the United States and do it in a false or deceptive manner, including immigration services scams, you're subject to the jurisdiction of the Federal Trade Commission. There's a few major exceptions here and there, like regulated banks and securities that are regulated by other federal agencies, state regulators do insurance, things like that. But basically, it's a broad statute. If you do anything false or deceptively in this country, you're subject to our jurisdiction. So if we can go to the next slide, we'll talk about the 2 different ways that we enforce various actions, both immigration actions, immigration scams, and others. One route is through administrative litigation. We used to do a lot of that. We do a lot less of it these days. The other is through federal court litigation, and we do a lot of that. And now we only have civil jurisdiction, but it's civil jurisdiction with teeth. I'd like to just sort of point out some of the remedies that we're able to achieve. We bring these cases oftentimes ex parte, one party, and we seek temporary restraining orders that are going to immediately shut down a business and stop them from violating the law. We have the ability to freeze corporate assets and individual assets. So even the individuals that run notorious scams and so forth, we can freeze their individual assets, and we do it without their knowledge. That's the ex parte part. And we can seek immediate access to books and records, which essentially means the court grants us the authority to walk into their office and go through their books and records. And we can seek the appointment of receivers or monitors to control the business and make sure that they don't violate the law. Ultimately, we're seeking permanent injunctions and consumer restitution. We get money back to folks if we can. And if those permanent injunctions are violated, we can seek contempt, which actually can go into criminal sanctions. If we go to the next slide, please, I'm going to go over just a couple of the different enforcement actions that the Federal Trade Commission has brought in the immigration services scam arena. The first one is Loma International, which is sort of a local mom and pop notarial fraud, although it's pretty big. And then the second one we're going to talk about, and go ahead and move to the next slide, is going to be the Immigration Center case, which was a large internet scam. So Loma. Loma was referred to us by Catholic Charities, and I know we have some probably representatives of Catholic Charities and other NGOs out there, folks that are working to assist immigrants. We really appreciate it when you come to us and let us know about problems that you're seeing out there. We'll get into that a little bit more here in a moment. But in this particular case, Catholic Charities provided above and beyond the call assistance. They found consumer witnesses, they interviewed them, they talked with them, and convinced them that it was in their best interest and everyone's best interest that they come forward and provide sworn declarations, and later I think 5 or 6 of them testified at trial, and Catholic Charities was very helpful in finding witnesses for us. But this particular scam was targeting immigrants from El Salvador and Honduras. They were mostly filing for TPS, temporary protective status, and they did so. They were not authorized to do so. They weren't lawyers. They weren't accredited representatives, and roughly 60% of their applications that they submitted were either rejected or denied. There were even consumers whose applications should have been accepted who spent a significant amount of time in detention centers because of the work that Loma International did. Like I was talking about in terms of the ability to roll in and have teeth, the FTC obtained a temporary restraining order, an asset freeze, and an appointment of a monitor. If we can go to the next slide. We eventually litigated this case and obtained a permanent injunction. And basically, some of the things that are important about this case is the decision from the court defined immigration services to include selecting which benefits to apply for and which applications or other forms to use. So it's a very broad definition of what is an immigration service. And the second important point is it held that offering immigration services was a false implied claim that Loma was authorized to provide those services. So by doing these things, they were violating the Federal Trade Commission Act. We were able to get them banned from ever having anything to do with immigration services in the future, and got an order providing for 100% restitution to the consumer victims, all the money that they lost, up to $616,000. And another thing I should mention about that, one of the remedies that we often seek in these types of cases is to get the documents that perhaps are in the possession of the notarios back in the hands of the consumers who they belong, like their passports and their birth certificates and other important original documents. In this case, we also with the assistance of the monitor, reached out to the local immigration law community, and we had a 2-day seminar, which we got all of the individual victims, help with their immigration problems. So that was another remedy that we sought. We go to the next slide, if you will, talk a little bit about the second matter, which is much different. Instead of sort of a mom and pop operation operating in one town, this was a large internet scam, and the defendants misrepresented that they were authorized to provide immigration services and that they were affiliated with the U.S. government, and that the fees that they charged were basically the USCIS processing fees. And they used some clever sounding, official sounding websites with names, URLs like USCIS-ins.us and USCIS-helpline, so forth. They even paid internet search engines to appear at the top of searches. Like if you were to actually search USCIS, they came up before USCIS. So our Northwest Regional Office in Seattle brought that case. The first case that I mentioned was brought here out of our Dallas office. If we go to the next slide, the Seattle office had a lot of help in this. We were joined by USCIS and ICE and the Nevada Attorney General, and the Colorado Attorney General, and Missouri Attorney General, EOIR, Postal Inspection Service. This was a big case, and we were able to get them permanently banned from providing immigration services, and it imposed a judgment in excess of $3 million. And again, in this case, we were able to get documents back to consumers that need those documents. And as a follow-up, we referred these matters to the Department of Justice, and they brought criminal cases together with in Missouri against the individual defendants in this matter, and the three of them got 130 months, one of them 82 months, and 12 months in federal prison, respectively. So if I can move to the next slide, I know that there's a lot of folks that are law enforcement on the line, and this I want to address directly to you. The two cases that we mentioned were part of 5 years ago initiation of the Combating Immigration Services Scams initiative, and this is an ongoing initiative, and we still have ongoing calls, and you can see from the slide, these are the participants. In addition to the FTC, we have DOJ, USCIS, EOIR, 20 state AGs, and the consumer education campaigns and so forth that Amy was talking about with USCIS are part of these. If we go to the next slide, the First Tuesday group, we meet now on a quarterly basis. And everybody, if you're a law enforcement official, you're invited to join us if you're not already participating. And you can send me an email. The last slide here will have my email address, but it's just tcarter@ftc.gov. Pretty simple. If you have law enforcement authority and you want to join us for our First Tuesday group calls, they're really terrific. We have them with 26 AGs and lots of UPIL committees, or UPL, unauthorized practice of law committees, that also do UPIL, immigration law issues, as well as local city and county prosecutors and county affairs organizations, those kinds of things. Some of the recent topics have included, we recently had the New York City talked about their efforts to combat immigration services scams and their new UPIL enforcement guide, which is a real great resource for law enforcers. EOIR talked about their new regulations regarding legal representation in immigration matters, including the accreditation of non-attorney representatives. Always have interesting topics, and the good news here is our next call is next Tuesday. So if you want to join or listen in and see if you'd like to join, you can give me a shout out, and we'll give you the information so that you can do that. If I can go to the next slide. Consumer Sentinel is a real important element of this initiative, and it's a national database with millions of consumer fraud complaints in it, and it has lots of contributors, the new CFPB, the FBI, Better Business Bureaus, lots of different state AGs, and in terms of notarial fraud, importantly, USCIS, ICE, FDNS, EUIR are all contributors to the Consumer Sentinel database, and this is a password-protected, law enforcement-only database. Anybody can put complaints in, but law enforcement can pull them out, and there are over 2,100 law enforcement members that can do that. So if you are law enforcement and you're not a member, you can join. If you go to the next slide, I was going to show you that it has quite a few, but not as many as could be, immigration services scam complaints. As you can see, it's been growing. In 2012, we got 746 complaints, and it's moved up to around 1,000 complaints a year in 2014 and 2015. But the more complaints we get, the more useful the tool is. And as I said, this is now where ICE and USCIS and FDNS, once they've vetted a case and decided that they don't want to pursue it criminally, they're logging those complaints in here. So this really is the national repository for complaints against notarios and others that are purveying immigration services scams. So if you are law enforcement and you haven't joined, you can get a password and you can get this right at your desk. Then you should do so. And I want to move to the next slide, and that will tell you how you can join the Consumer Sentinel. There's our help desk, the 877-701-9595. You can call and they will help you get registered, or you can go to that website there, registration help at consumersentinel.gov. So if we can move to the next slide, and I want to address the organizations out there that are assisting immigrants. You can't query information on the complaints there, but you can enter information, and I really want to encourage you to do so. You guys are kind of out there where the rubber meets the road, and you see those scams, and you talk to people that are victims, and you please encourage them to go to the FTC, and I'll tell you how to do that in a moment, and file a complaint, or you can file complaints on their behalf. And some important notes here. They can be filed anonymously. Obviously, the more information that we get, the better, and perhaps an organization could file it on anonymously on behalf of the individual, but then the organization could give their name and number, and if we really were doing an important investigation and needed to talk to those victims, we could contact your organization, and perhaps you could do what Catholic Charities did for us when we did the Loma case. You could convince the folks that it's important to come forward. So if we can go to the next slide. This is sort of, this is real easy. This is how you can file a complaint with the FTC, which goes into our Consumer Sentinel database. The telephone number, 877-FTC-HELP, and there are operators standing by at normal business hours for most of the country, and they do speak Spanish, so that's an important advantage. Or you can just file it online. Just go to the ftc.gov /complaint or ftc.gov and to our homepage there and click on the icon for a complaint. It'll take you to our complaint assistant that'll ask you pretty much the same questions that the live operator will ask you. One of the added benefits to going to the live operator is they can also make suggestions about help, send you brochures, and give you advice on how to handle the situation. So that's sort of a twofer there. You not only get to file a complaint, but you get assistance. We could go to the next slide, and we're almost done here. I wanted to talk also about our consumer education materials just briefly. We have 3 pieces that we use in the immigration services scam area. One talks about how to avoid scams, how to recognize scams against immigrants, and it's available in English, Spanish, Chinese, Korean, Creole, and Vietnamese. And then the latter 2 are sort of, I need immigration help, who can help me? And there's advice on how to find proper lawyer or other authorized representative to assist them. The second version of that is what we call sort of a palm card, and it folds down into really like a business card size, and it can be used for organizations perhaps that are assisting folks at detention centers. It's really handy. You can just hand it to them. So if I can go to the next slide.
All right, Tom, and I'm hurrying you up a little bit because we're a little bit short on time, but if you can just briefly mention where folks can find you. Thank you.
1 minute or less. The next 2 slides. Go to the next slide after that. We have these photo novellas, which are allowing us to help reach consumers, especially those that speak Spanish, and these are little storyboards that are easy to read, and we have the latest one on notarial fraud. If you go to the final slide, or close to the final slide, the good news is if you're an organization, these brochures are free. You can order them in bulk. There's the email address down there at the bottom, bulkorder.ftc.gov, and they're in the public domain. So if you want to download it and add your own organization's logo and pass them out as your own, you can certainly do that. And if you go to the next slide, you can see again there's just the bulk order, and there's some instructions on how to order them in bulk, and there's my email address. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you today. I know we've covered a lot, but I know that all of you out there are I want to do the same thing and help folks and make sure that they're not scammed by these notarios and others. And the more we can communicate and work together, the better we can do that job. So thank you again.
All right. Thank you so much, Tom, and that was a really comprehensive overview, and I would really encourage local law enforcement to reach out to the Federal Trade Commission because they really do have the expertise from these cases that they are happy to share with local agencies. Next up, we're going to be going a little bit more specific. So like I said, we're starting in New York City, and Mayerling Rivera is here with us. She's an assistant district attorney with the New York County District Attorney's Office. She spent 8 years in a trial bureau where she prosecuted a variety of street crimes. She then transferred to the office's Special Victims Bureau, where she specialized in cases of domestic violence. In 2011, she was appointed co-director of the Immigrant Affairs Unit, where, in addition to handling cases of financial fraud against immigrants, she frequently speaks at events throughout New York City regarding fraud prevention in immigrant communities and the unauthorized practice of law. And hopefully you will now be able to see Mayerling's presentation. Mayerling, do you see that on the screen?
I do, I see it.
Okay, great. Then I'll go ahead and control it and hand it over to you, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Anne. Good afternoon. It's such a privilege to be here to talk about how we are dealing with this issue on a local level. As Anne said, my name is Mayerling Rivera. I'm an assistant district attorney and also the director of the Manhattan District Attorney's Immigrant Affairs Unit. Next slide. So I'll tell you a little bit about my office. The District Attorney of Manhattan is Cyrus Vance. We have jurisdiction over cases that happen in Manhattan, so crimes that occur within the county of New York. We are a very large district attorney's office. We have over 500 prosecutors, and our support staff is over 700 people. So pretty large as far as prosecutors' offices go. Just to tell you a little bit about our structure, or the structure of my office, the office is divided into the investigation division and the trial division. The Immigrant Affairs Unit is part of the Financial Fraud Bureau, which is part of the investigation division. To talk about my unit specifically, the Immigrant Affairs Unit was created in 2007 by the district attorney at that time, Robert Morgenthau. We've been lucky that since District Attorney Vance took over, he has continued to put effort and resources into this important issue. Our unit was the first of its kind in the nation. We've been lucky in that after 2007, in the last couple of years, several other jurisdictions have opened their own immigrant affairs. So now there's one in Brooklyn, one in Queens, one in Nassau County, which is Long Island, New York, and just last month, the most recent office was created in Bronx County in New York City. Next slide. So what do? Our unit has a dual mission. The first is to investigate and prosecute financial fraud committed against immigrants. The second is to educate both the immigrant community in Manhattan and the public about immigration fraud to prevent victimization. One of the most important things that we tell people when we go out and talk in the community is that you can report a crime to us regardless of your immigration status. Next slide. So why is it important to have a unit specifically dedicated to immigrants or to fraud against immigrants? Well, you know, we've realized that immigrants have some pretty unique qualities. And unfortunately, those qualities make them particularly vulnerable to criminals. There's first, I guess, the most obvious, and it's the fear of law enforcement, and that is most relevant if someone is undocumented or of undocumented status. There are also language barriers. Many immigrants don't speak English. That makes it just that much more difficult to report crime. Also, you know, even as a United States citizen, it's difficult to understand the system or how the system works. Many immigrants come from countries where the legal system is completely different. So it's very easy to scam someone if that person doesn't understand how the system works. And lastly, we've seen that in many immigrant communities, it's common to make payments in cash. And that makes it easier for a criminal to scam you because, as we all know, cash doesn't leave a fingerprint. Next slide, please. So what we tried to do is to create a safe place for people to report crime in Manhattan. We get most of our complaints through our hotline. We run a hotline that's live, so there are actually people that are answering the phone. We call them coordinators. Those coordinators speak different languages. The languages that are most prevalent in Manhattan are Spanish and Chinese. So we have coordinators that speak both Spanish and Chinese, and then they have access to all different languages. So we want to make it comfortable for people to call us and be able to speak in their own language if they want to report being the victim of a scam. People can also come to our office in person or send in a complaint via the mail. Next slide. So what type of complaints do we get? We get all sorts of scams that are perpetrated against immigrants. Those include real estate scams, employment scams, and then what we've been talking about here today, which is the unauthorized practice of law or notario scams. These are people who claim to be attorneys or who provide legal advice when they are not attorneys and are not authorized to give legal advice. And as I said, this includes notario scams, and the reason why notario scams exist is because in many Latin American countries, notarios or notaries are not only attorneys, but have an even higher degree than an attorney. So that creates confusion. Many Latin American people think that when they go to a notario, they're actually going to a lawyer, and criminals take advantage of this confusion. Most of the complaints that we get are a variation of this scam. Next slide, please. I know I have limited time, so I'll talk about two cases that we've prosecuted. The first is People versus Mark Payne. Mr. Payne was a volunteer at the United Nations here in Manhattan. He told his victims that because he was a volunteer at the United Nations, that he had special access and could get them temporary protective status. Mr. Payne was a Haitian immigrant, as were all of his victims. They paid him thousands of dollars to grant them or to get them the status. Obviously, he had no authority to do this. They ended up reporting him to us, and he was convicted after a jury trial and received a sentence of 5 to 10 years incarceration. We also had another case next slide. That's the correct slide. People versus Espinal. Mr. Espinal, quote unquote, owned a law firm in Midtown Manhattan. For approximately 14 years, he owned this law firm. He was a very popular person in the Hispanic community in Manhattan. Because of that, he served as a legal consultant for a major Spanish language television station. He promised his victims green cards, visas, all different types of benefits. Once the case was reported to us, we figured out that he was not licensed to practice law in the United States, but guilty for doing this and for 14 years, and was also convicted after a jury trial. Next slide, please. We get many of our cases, just like Tom and the FTC, through community organizations and lawyers and other people that deal with immigrants on a daily basis. In our experience, there are certain things that are red flags or indicators that something is a scam or a fraud. So for those service providers out there or those immigration lawyers that hear about these things, just keep these indicators in mind when you're interviewing someone. Was cash demanded? Many of these people tend to ask for cash and won't take a money order or check. Was a receipt provided? Usually when we get these cases, there has been no receipt, so we don't know who the money was given to. Was the person asked to sign documents that were blank or documents that were in English when they only spoke Spanish or only spoke another language? Was the client not provided with any copies of documents? Many times we have people reporting things to us, and when we ask them, well, what was it that was filed for you, they have no idea because they didn't get copies. And there's also, the general category of atypical practices. And an example of this is we had a case where the defendant would do consultations out of his car. He carried a shield and a gun in a holster and pretended to be an ICE agent. So, there are certain things or certain scenarios that are, questionable and could be an indicator of fraud or of a scam. Next slide, please. We could workers. We do many for patients, churches, schools, legal service providers. We work with the bar associations. The media is very important. We've started an initiative with the consulates since we have consulates in Manhattan, and we've noticed that immigrants would rather go to their consulate than go to the police. We've started training consulate staff so that they then report crimes to us. And obviously we have a very important partner in USCIS and in AILA, which has allowed us to do this webinar today and be able to speak to you. So, that is mine. I tried to keep it to 10 minutes. I thank you so much for listening, and I'll be happy to answer questions at the end.
Thank you so much, Mayerling. We're going to go ahead and pull up the next presentation. Now we're going to the West Coast. We're going to California, and we're going to be hearing from Rigo Reyes. And Rigo is the Chief of Investigations and Consumer Protection for the County of Los Angeles Department of Consumer and Business Affairs. He works with his staff and department partners in creating, implementing, and enhancing consumer protection services. Relevant to this discussion, his office investigates consumer fraud cases for referral to prosecution agencies, and that includes civil and criminal prosecution. So that makes his presentation unique within the group. And I'm going to go ahead and hopefully be able to cue this up. If you can just wait with me for one moment. All right. Rigo, do we have you on the line?
I am ready to go.
Okay.
As soon as the slide comes up, if you can actually...
Perfect. Okay.
Can you thumb over to slide 3?
Sure thing. Let's go ahead and cue that up.
And while that is loading, I just wanted to again emphasize how important it is to work together with the partners we have in the nonprofit community, certainly the legal aid organizations, agencies at the federal, state, county, and local level. In working this type of complaints that I've been doing for the last 20 years, I've learned that really the only way to provide effective assistance and redress to some of these victims, we have to work together. And I'm very fortunate to have some very strong support, as I mentioned, from all types of agencies here in Los Angeles when our investigations team go out to stop some of these issues. As you can see this slide, I just wanted to point out the magnitude of this problem when you look at the population in Los Angeles County alone. When you have 10 plus million people interacting who come from all over the world, that things are going to go sour sometimes, particularly with these immigration-related scams that we hear about, too often. I wanted to point out that our department helps, consumers in sort of a holistic way, in the sense that we provide one-on-one assistance when someone files a complaint. And we can do that through mediation of complaints, issues that we don't see raised to a criminal or civil type of violation. We try to get some resolution. And I think that's important because in many times consumers are having some challenges that for one reason or another, their case is not going to be prosecuted. As you know, resources are limited. Priorities have to be accounted for. And in many cases, we manage, by we, I mean my investigators, manage to find some resolution, get some of the money back for these consumers, get them the right assistance so that they can move on and try to rebuild their situation. In the cases where we see that there is fraud involved, we package those investigations. We work from the very beginning extremely closely with our partners, the local city attorney in the city of Los Angeles, certainly the district attorney for the Los Angeles County, the Attorney General's office. We have cases with them at any given time. Because again, once we identify an issue, we need to make sure that the various aspects of the case are accounted for. If we can move to the next slide, please. And so most of these bullet points that you see on this next slide have been already referred to. I just wanted to bring your attention to the one, at the very end, the crime of affinity. And these are, specifically for immigration fraud. Generally, you will see that the victim falls, prey to these unscrupulous individuals because of the trust issue. And usually that comes about due to their common language, their religion, certainly their country of origin. And what that really brings as a challenge is that it's extremely difficult to convince consumers to report these issues. And so when trying to investigate these cases, we can start with one victim, two victims, and by the time we are done, through various ways, we can have thousands of consumers who went through the same situation but never reported what was going on. And unfortunately, sometimes when they report these issues, 10 years could have gone by of them waiting, hoping that in fact they were getting the help promised. So in working with our partners, if we can move to the next slide, it is very important for us, particularly agencies, nonprofits where victims are likely to go, places they trust, that when they take a complaint for referral to us, they give us the type of information that will help us figure out what is going on and how we can follow up on the investigation. For instance, our local legal aid organizations are very, very effective in taking statements from the victims, and when they refer the case to us, they attach the statement that explains what went wrong and what was the issue that the notario should not have opened that petition because it was, bound to be harmful to the consumer, securing documents, contact information for the victims right up front, so that if they move, we have issues finding them, we have a way to try to help them. I wanted to also mention, and that hasn't been mentioned, a lot of times consumers go to places that claim to be nonprofits, and they may have some, really a phony filing with their agency pretending to be a nonprofit, but in reality is just a disguised operation. And when they portray themselves as nonprofit, that will, again, make the consumer lower their guard, not ask as many questions, and then end up in a really bad situation. So, keep those in mind. Also, we see many attorneys who enable the bad, immigration consultants and notarios to do the bad things they are doing. And in identifying what's going on, sometimes we run up against attorneys that are licensed, that are doing things they shouldn't be doing, and that's when we rely on our partners with the state bar to figure out how to proceed. Next slide, please.
I just wanted to interject. If anyone's not speaking now, would you please put your phones on mute? Thank you.
I wanted to, spend my next 5 minutes here to review this case study and highlight some of the issues, the opportunities, the challenges that came up that may help you in pursuing similar cases. This notario, Mr. Jesus Lozano, very typical, had been posing as an attorney, providing all kinds of, advice, legal advice to consumers for over 15 some years. And eventually when victims started complaining, they didn't come directly to us. They went to one of our local legal aid agencies that then referred them to us. And in launching our investigation, again, we had to rely on their assistance. Now, one thing to keep in mind in right away in listing the right partners has to do, as was mentioned earlier, with preserving the files, preserving the records of these consumers who blindly put their trust on these individuals. And it's not unusual for them to leave original, birth certificates, marriage licenses, all types of documents that if this operation closes down, it's going to be very difficult for the consumer to recover those documents. And another really good thing in terms of getting the files up front is to identify other victims, to add to the case. So when we look at these cases, if we see that the notario is practicing law without a license, and in consulting with the State Bar of California, they determine that they have enough reason to take over the operation. They work, with us. We work with them in going and closing down the place and taking the files. And so not only is that going to tell us the additional victims, it also tells us, if some consumer is coming up for a hearing, if they need access to their documents, to their file, so we can make it available. And tied to that, we routinely enlist the help of the legal aid organizations in case a consumer needs immediate legal representation, so they can get some consultation going, connected with some attorney to appear at a upcoming hearing and the like. So it is again from the very beginning very crucial to identify the partners that case is going to require. Next slide, please. And so as with most cases, this individual included all the red flags that were mentioned already, including that sign that you see on the right. He was in a building that was mostly housing law offices, and you can see his name down the list. So anyone who came in automatically assumed that he was an attorney as well. And when they asked him directly whether he was an attorney, he would invariably say yes, or he would give him an answer that led consumers to believe that they, in fact, were dealing with an attorney. Now, the last bullet point there, the hijacking of the case process, by that I mean something that we see routinely, and this is the immigration consultant, the notario, taking over the process of the petition they file on behalf of the consumer with USCIS. And, for various reasons, but primarily we see that using their address as the place to receive all correspondence back from USCIS to the consumer gives the notario total control of the case, including requesting additional fees each time that a notice for a hearing comes up, or anything related to the case would give them the excuse to convince the consumer to come in the office, pay an additional fee so they can get the notice received. So, that's not unusual, and clearly that can create some serious issues. If USCIS sends the consumer a time-sensitive notice, like it's happening in a different case, we are working with our city attorney's office, where the notario failed to notify the consumer of an upcoming hearing, and then subsequently a final notice also mailed to the consumer at the consultant's address that was basically telling the consumer that she was about to be deported for failure to respond. So, look for those issues in dealing with these situations. Next slide, please.
And Rigo, I think I'm going to have you, I know the next few slides are just describing sort of what BIA accredited reps and attorneys and nonprofits can provide. So maybe we can go to the statutes, and then if you can just briefly mention the work group that you run in, it helps.
Right. I'm just going to use 60 seconds here on the statute, and then if you can thumb to slide 16 to wrap it up.
Okay.
So, in California, we have a statute that regulates anyone providing immigration-related services who is not a licensed attorney or a BIA-accredited organization. And that statute basically prohibits these individuals from providing legal advice It requires that they be bonded, have a $100,000 bond, be fingerprinted. Anyone with a felony conviction is banned from being a consultant. And it's not just a location that needs to comply with those restrictions. It's every individual who interacts with the public at any of their locations. So for us, in building some of these cases, we can do paper investigation. We can do undercover investigations routinely to go and ascertain what's really been said to consumers. Again, working pretty closely with our prosecuting partners to identify the violations. That statute, it's helpful in building these cases, but it's not the only protection consumers have. This slide shows you some of the general consumer protection regulations and statutes that we have as well that are used very commonly by the prosecuting agencies to stop these individuals, including, the good old grand theft, which is contained in the penal code. And now, if we can move to slide 16, so I can just, quickly go over a working group that we have here in Los Angeles County. Over the last 18 months, we got together and again, really concluded that the only way to make a dent on this type of issues was to meet regularly, identify who the key partners are, identify cases, and then assign them, to various agencies. As I have listed that, number of agencies at the federal, state, and local levels, and it's incredibly helpful to have them on board to identify the victims, do the investigations, get them to a prosecuting agency to investigate, and ultimately, helping the victims after even the case is filed. And the last slide, which is the next one, provides what the group, one before that one, so that would be that one. There is a list of considerations that from the very get-go our participants look at in terms of determining, how viable a case is and what we need to build a successful prosecution. In the last one, slide 18, I just wanted to, update you on some developments countywide. There is a county, task force that is convened by the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors to help consumers, again, with identifying, preventing, helping them deal with this fraud. And just yesterday, we launched what we call a bus ad campaign that is hitting the major bus lines throughout the Los Angeles County with billboards inside and outside the buses, telling consumers to be extremely careful and to give us a call if they have issues. So I would be more than glad to share with any of you going forward any of the things we have learned in dealing with this very harmful, crime over the last, like I said, 20 years. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rigo. And I know that we are going to be short on time for questions, but I am hopeful that we can at least get through the content because we do still want to hear from Texas and Maryland. So next up, we will have Valeria Sartorio, who's an Assistant Attorney General with the Consumer Protection Division of the Texas Office of the Attorney General. She joined the Attorney General's office in 2013, and a significant portion of her docket is dedicated to prosecuting unauthorized practice of immigration law with their various Texas statutes. And if you just hold for one moment, I'm going to be pulling up Valeria's presentation. And Valeria, you are welcome to start even without the presentation up on the board, but it'll be on very, very shortly.
Okay, thanks very much, Annie. It really is an honor to be here today, so thanks very much for the opportunity. So I'm going to start by providing a very brief overview of our Consumer Protection Division and then discuss some unauthorized practice of immigration law cases that we have prosecuted. Now, before I proceed any further, just a quick disclaimer that the views expressed are mine and they are not the official opinions of our office. Next slide, please. So our division protects consumers and legitimate businesses by filing civil lawsuits. And we do so under the Deceptive Trade Practices Act, the DTPA, and other consumer protection statutes. We have our main office in Austin, and we have five additional offices throughout the state. Next slide, please. When we file our lawsuits, we do so on behalf of the state of Texas and the public good. So even though we do not represent individual consumers, we can still seek restitution on consumers' behalf. We actually prosecute a wide variety of cases in addition to the unauthorized practice of immigration law. Examples include diploma mills, debt collection, and even online dating service providers, which are pretty interesting as well. Next slide, please. Now, we have a variety of resources that we provide consumers. For example, we conduct outreach events to increase public awareness for regarding scams. We also have a consumer protection hotline. Next slide, please. And we have a website that offers extensive consumer-oriented resources. Next slide. And that includes the online filing of complaints, which we have in English and in Spanish. Next slide. And I'm just zipping through these slides in the interest of time.
Great,
so now
thank you.
I want to share with you some of the issues that we have faced in Texas with these unauthorized practice of immigration law cases. First off, I think it's important to distinguish between a Texas notary public and a notario público, which is the Spanish translation of a notary public. So a notary public in Texas is authorized to perform certain acts, things like taking acknowledgments or protesting instruments. However, they are not authorized to practice law. Also, whatever fees they charge are capped at $6. So they can charge for their services, but it can't be more than $6. In contrast, a notario público in Latin America and in European countries is the equivalent of an attorney. So when we have a notary public in Texas who's representing himself as a notario público to, let's say, an immigrant seeking legal services, it's very possible that the consumer will believe that the notary public is actually an attorney. So it does create a lot of confusion and a lot of problems. Next slide, please. Some of the common schemes that we have seen are notarios representing that they can secure the release of a consumer who might be detained at an immigration detention facility, perhaps representing that they can get them out on bond by attending a hearing. They also falsely represent that they can appeal a person's case. They file fraudulent petitions for relief for which consumers do not qualify. And they also file false asylum applications to obtain work permits. And all of these actions, unfortunately, result in very severe consequences for these consumers, ranging from, for example, deportation, they're denied the relief they seek, and, of course, they're swindled out of thousands of dollars. We see consumers borrow money from family members. They come together to come up with thousands of dollars to pay for legal services, but it's not at all uncommon for these consumers to later show up in court and they're forced to represent themselves because at the end of the day, there's no attorney to represent them, even though they pay for representation. So more often than not, we see these consumers who actually pay money and, of course, they don't receive the service. Next slide, please. So next, I'd like to talk about some statutes that we use in prosecuting some of these cases, specifically the DTPA, the Deceptive Trade Practices Act, and the Texas Government Code. So under the DTPA, any false, misleading, and deceptive act or practice in the conduct of trade or commerce is prohibited. And we can seek injunctions, penalties, and restitution. If we seek civil penalties, we can ask for up to $20,000 per violation. Now, importantly, under the DTPA, the general rule is that it's not applicable to a person who is rendering a professional service, anything involving advice, judgment, or opinion. So, for example, an attorney. However, this exemption is not applicable to this person misrepresentation of material facts, fails to disclose information that's known at the time if it was intended to induce a consumer into a transaction, or engages in an unconscionable action that, again, cannot be characterized as advice, judgment, or opinion. So getting back to an example of a duly licensed attorney, if that attorney is aiding a non-attorney in the unauthorized practice of immigration law, it's possible that we can take action under the DTPA. Next slide. So under the Texas Government Code, if the person is a notary public and somehow states or implies that he is an attorney, solicits or accepts compensation to prepare documents, or even uses the word notario or notario público to advertise his services without including a disclaimer making clear that he is not authorized to practice law, he's in violation of the Texas Government Code. Also, if the person charges more than $6 for services, that's a violation. And if we have a judgment against a person and that person violates it, we can also file a contempt action under the Texas Government Code, where we can seek up to $500 and confinement in county jail for up to 6 months per violation, not to exceed 18 months. So this really is a very powerful statute. Next slide. So now I just want to share with you examples of 2 cases that we've prosecuted. The first one, State of Texas v. Jessica Rivas-Alva et al. This case involved a husband and wife. They were both Texas notaries. They operated a law office out of San Antonio, Texas. The wife traveled nationwide to various immigration detention facilities to meet with clients and solicit business, while the husband stayed in the office, answered phone calls from clients, and he also impersonated attorneys during telephonic hearings before immigration judges. They also illegally hired an attorney. They actually paid him a salary to occasionally represent their clients in court. But of course, unfortunately, these clients oftentimes would show up to court and there was no attorney to represent them. So we ended up with a lot of victims who were harmed. The outcome of this case was actually filed in 2013. A year later, we had judgments against all defendants. There were 5 of them. And specifically against the husband and wife, the judgment ordered them to pay $1 million in civil penalties, which was reduced to $15,000 contingent on their compliance with the order. They were also ordered to pay $20,000 in attorney's fees and $21,000 in restitution. Unfortunately, the husband and wife believed that they could just continue to do what they were doing, and they continued to offer services in violation of the orders. So last year, we filed a contempt action against them, and now they're both serving 18 months in county jail, and the state was awarded over $1 million. Next slide. So this next slide illustrates some of the items that we actually seized pursuant to an asset freeze when we filed suit. And these were sold at auction for restitution. It included 2 vehicles and a lot of designer purses and shoes. Next slide. This next case also involves a Texas notary. He held himself out to the public as an immigration consultant. He offered to assist consumers with immigration services, and this lawsuit was filed in 2011. The following year, we did obtain a judgment against him where he was ordered to pay $5,000 in civil penalties and $5,000 in attorney's fees. Now here in the underlying case, there were no victims that we identified, so we did not have restitution. However, we did file a contempt action in 2014, and the defendant was ordered to pay $10,000 in restitution and $50,000 in civil penalties. Additionally, he was ordered to serve 6 months in county jail, but that was suspended for 1 year contingent on his compliance with the contempt judgment. So in summary, both of these cases illustrate how serious the problem is regarding the unauthorized practice of immigration law. We really need the increased awareness and reporting of potential violations so that we can combat the unauthorized practice of immigration law and, of course, continue to protect a very vulnerable population. Thank you so much for your time, and I'll be happy to answer any questions at the end.
Thank you very much, Valeria. very last but not least, we have Kurt Zeager, who's coming to us from Maryland. He's an assistant state's attorney, or was an assistant state's attorney for Montgomery County, Maryland, situated just outside of the D.C. area for the past 8 years. As a state's attorney's office, he handled a wide range of cases, including hate crimes, violent crimes, economic crimes, and most recently, sex abuse crimes. He recently began working for the Office of the Attorney General for Maryland on their organized crime division. And we're really happy to have him as well on this in this presentation because he can speak to having more limited resources but still doing great work. And so I am just going to very shortly be able to pull up the slides. So bear with me for one moment. All right, Kurt, take it away whenever you're ready.
And good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for your attention. I'm going to try to do this in 5 minutes. So what you've heard and picked up on is that there's a number of consistent themes, and essentially the bulk of the cases that you'll see at the local level, and I'm speaking directly to law enforcement who are sitting at their desks saying, this is great, but how do I practically go about doing this? The bulk of the cases you're going to see are advanced fee schemes. Give me the money up front, give me cash, and I can do this for you, and then just putting the consumer off and putting the consumer off. And, and this comes about mainly as referred to as an affinity or a confidence game. You're Latino, I'm Latino. There's an inherent trust, and insert whoever that you're in front of and whoever's being taken advantage of. The cases that I handled were Latino in Montgomery County. There's a large Latino population, and typically in a chain migration community, you have sort of a paper person, the people that they go to, and in particular, this guy's name was Ramon Escarfale or Scarfolet, and he operated just as we've all discussed. He asked for money up front. He held himself out, if you go to the next slide, as a tax and immigration specialist, and he was nothing more than a scam artist. Essentially, his was particular conniving. They would come to him. If you go to the next slide, he's saying, if you've been here for 10 years, I'm going to go ahead and get you a green card. He would apply for a sham asylum paperwork. Basically, my cousin in Latin America was once threatened by MS-13, and therefore I'm scared. This was an actual asylum paperwork that was filled out, that he filled out. He automatically gets a 6-month work visa for the person seeking the services. They think he's great. They get put into the system and they get deported. And he takes the money for those 6 months, and they're deported from the United States, or put in deportation proceedings. So his was particularly conniving. Like Tom Carter said from the FTC, the only way that you're going to prosecute this case is, or if you link up with your local legal aid community and nonprofits. For us, it was Catholic Charities and IUTA. I was able to make some relationships with people at those organizations and said, we would love to prosecute these cases, but Mayerling said from Manhattan, there's fear of law enforcement. If you don't have your papers, you don't want to go to law enforcement, you think you're going to be deported. So the only way to go about this, and the first step, is to get in touch with Catholic Charities or IUTA, or whatever your legal aid community is, and get them to bring people to you, bring the victims to you. That's how you build the bridge. And for those of you who are in the position, please save all paperwork. Bring us all the paperwork you have. I linked up with one detective who spoke Spanish. We would have the victims come in 2 or 3 at a time, take their statements, look at their paperwork, and that's how we put the cases together. In this particular case, he got 6 months of jail, and they actually got their restitution back, which was in the roughly about $9,000, and he was put on 5 years of supervised probation. So that's a very practical look at how to go about tackling these cases. There was not a lot of resources. Basically, me and my stakeholders, which was Catholic Charities and IUTA. So I know you've heard and seen those consistent themes, but these are usually advanced fee schemes among the particularly vulnerable, and I think all you really have to do is start talking to your stakeholders, and they are extremely helpful, and they're built-in experts. You don't have to really know a lot. They're lawyers. They're very, very good, and thank you very much for your time.
And thank you, Kurt, for doing the job of helping us to put the bridges together between all of the presentations today. This has been really helpful. I want to point folks to another resource which we mentioned on the advertisement for this webinar that's been created by the Protecting Immigrant New Yorkers Task Force, which is a now toolkit called Collaborating to Protect Immigrant New Yorkers, a resource guide for law enforcement, government, and advocates. And that's available at protectingimmigrants.org/2016/02/04/PINY-resource-guide /. And hopefully that is a resource that you can use. I do think that since the GoToWebinar is not kicking us off, I'd like to have us have a little bit of time for questions. So I'm going to go ahead and look through the questions that have been provided. I know one of them was relating to U visas for victims of notario fraud. And so what I will just say briefly on that topic is that the U visa exists for victims of certain qualifying crimes who've been helpful in the detection, investigation, or prosecuting of that qualifying crime, have suffered substantial harm and are helpful or willing to be helpful to law enforcement. In notario fraud or immigration services fraud cases, we have seen clients who are also the victims of some of the qualifying crimes. So on that list, I would include extortion, blackmail, obstruction of justice, witness tampering, perjury, fraud in foreign labor contracting, stalking, or similar crimes, and who have been substantially harmed. So we've heard from advocates across the country who are dealing with clients who have even attempted suicide based on the financial loss and the effect on their immigration case. So certainly the harm is there. And as we've heard from all of the prosecutors, the victims stepping out of their comfort zone and speaking out is the only way that these crimes are going to be prosecuted. And so we really encourage advocates to be liaising with prosecutors and ask for that certification where the facts align well with the required elements of the U visa. In addition, I'll just say from the immigration attorney perspective, it's also really useful when we can have prosecutors provide letters of support indicating that a victim will be a witness, for instance, in a future criminal prosecution. That can sometimes allow for extensions in immigration court where they're needed because a victim needs to attend to the criminal case and needs additional time for their immigration matter. And in addition, sometimes that allows us as immigration advocates to seek prosecutorial discretion. So in the case of Ramon Escarfulet, for instance, he had placed immigrants without viable relief into deportation proceedings, and they would not be in deportation proceedings but for his actions. And so requesting prosecutorial discretion by showing that these victims were being helpful in a criminal prosecution was a viable form of immigration relief and did allow victims to feel comfortable coming forward. And so I don't know if anyone else on the panel has additional responses to that question about U visas or other immigration remedies for the victims in these cases. But I wanted to open that question up since I did see that in the...
This is Kurt. I wanted to respond to that.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, sorry. So with the U visa, if it is something that you want to ask for it at the end of the prosecution. Ask for it when the prosecution is over. The reason for that is that the U visa is a request for a U visa is a built-in motive to fabricate. So if you have someone, for instance, in an abuse case who comes forward asking for a U visa, obviously it's a huge incentive for someone who could get relief with a U visa. It's a big benefit for them. So if you ask when it's over, it doesn't create very practical issues for the prosecutor.
Okay.
Yeah, this is Tom Carter with the FTC. I would add also that all of the crimes that the U visa can assist for witnesses are criminal actions, not civil. So the FTC's actions are civil only. So while we're happy to put in a good word for someone if they've helped us, we don't have any authority to seek a U visa.
Okay, and so that's just a point of contention within the immigration advocacy community, because there are civil agencies who detect crimes and who refer for criminal prosecution those crimes, and they are certifiers. So, for instance, the Department of Labor and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and so and even I know there's a New York Human Rights Bureau as well that is a certifier, and so there are civil agencies who, because of their access to victims, are also identifying or detecting those qualifying crimes. And so it's not I hope that's not taken as a blanket statement. That is an agency-to-agency decision. And so I just would leave it there. I know we also received some questions about getting a copy of the presentation, and this presentation is being recorded, and the PowerPoints will be available as part of that recording. In addition, we will go ahead and post the PowerPoints separately on the ABA's Fight Notario Fraud and AILA's Stop Notario Fraud website, so that this is available in the future and can be hopefully even adapted. For instance, the FTC's presentation is in the free domain and could be adapted for your own presentations locally. Are there additional questions? If so, please go ahead and send them in the chat box. I am not seeing any quite yet. And I know one of the topics that we didn't get to that Rigo was interested in mentioning is state notarial fraud statutes that have these criminal sanctions. And there are many of our states who do not have statutes on the books, and that is another point of advocacy that can be something the Attorney General's offices and others on the ground can be involved in if your state is one of those states. So there are only about 21 that have state notarial fraud statutes. Rigo, do you want to say anything more about that?
You know, definitely. I wanted to mention the last slide that I was showing. It highlights or has a bullet point about a countywide ordinance that is being proposed. It is sort of modeled after the City of Chicago's statute that apparently has been extremely effective in licensing and regulating and just really enforcing this, issues so that we provide more responsive assistance to consumers. In California, we have the statewide statute, as I mentioned. It's not as tight as what Chicago has, in the sense that having such a broad jurisdiction over different counties, there isn't as a consistent enforcement component built in. We feel that if we get something at the county level, as is being proposed, that would give us some of the tools that we need. In particular, having access, to the licensing files for these individuals, that sometimes is very difficult to identify them. It's very difficult to try to figure out what assets they have and so on. Like I said, initially, I would be more than happy to, one, get some feedback from anyone interested, and also provide, whatever information I have available.
Right. Thank you, Rigo. We had another great question about how can we get states' attorneys' offices interested in prosecuting notario fraud. So I wonder if folks who can talk about sort of the political implications of taking these cases on behalf of the immigrant community. And if you can maybe address also kind of using the media to kind of highlight the issue and highlight how this work is effective. I know I'm not I don't want to put Kurt on the spot, but I know that that was something that was useful in the Scarfollette case, was that it allowed the state's attorney to also encourage victims of other crimes to come forward and to remind folks that their immigration was not of interest, that their victimhood was what the questions would be around.
And yes, I mean, the state's attorney, John McCarthy, did a very good job of expressing what some of the others expressed here today, that if you are living in the county, you're, the services are provided to you, and we certainly don't want to provide or allow any black markets, sort of like the broken windows theory. You need to go and you need to fix, regulate, and to, if you're a victim, you're a victim, you're a victim. And so we did media on that particular case, and we actually did countywide meetings with local law enforcement, answering a lot of different questions about from how to get driver's license, which was of particular interest, which drew the crowd, and then we talked about immigration fraud.
Anyone else want to tackle that question, especially anyone who's had pushback about taking these cases within your agency, if there has been? Okay. All right, we can move on to the next question then. The next question is coming from the New York City Department of Consumer Affairs. They'd like to know, where in general do immigration service providers currently advertise?
I guess I
Rigo.
can answer this question. Can you hear me?
Sure. Mayerling?
Yes.
Okay, great.
So what do they advertise? We've had a lot of cases where people get the information from the ethnic newspapers. So, what we've done to combat that is try and educate the media about this issue and let them know that they're a valuable partner, and it's crucial that they give correct information to the public, and that they vet these people, before they advertise for them. In addition to that, a lot of these places, particularly the multi-services, are mom and pop shops. So they're giving out cards on the street, they're posting things on bulletin boards, and that's how they're getting their information out.
Thanks.
This is Rigo in LA County. We see it advertised all over the place. For instance, in the Chinese community, you would open the Chinese yellow pages, and you will find full-page ads that are, definitely more expensive than a regular law firm would afford to publish. So, it's wide open. Another way we see very often is word of mouth. And this happens when a consumer goes to one of these places and they get temporary relief, not knowing that it's only buying them very limited time for some very harmful reading. We have had cases were hundreds of victims. There was one case that everyone who walked through the door, regardless of their background, country of origin, the consultant was filing political asylum. So what would happen, at least for a while, the consumer victim would get a work permit, then could apply for a Social Security number, and they believed that they had the real deal, that someone, in fact, could get them their documents. But what they didn't know is that, eventually CIS was going to adjudicate the case, and they weren't going to qualify for the political asylum, and they were going to be deported. But in the meantime, they would go tell their friends and relatives, look, I got a work permit, I have my social security number. This person really knows what he is doing. And so by the time people catch up, this guy had already moved, and he was opening elsewhere, running the same scam. So word of mouth is very powerful, and it's also very difficult to detect, because people think that if in fact they're getting a benefit, they don't want to report it, even when they start suspecting that something's not quite right.
Thank you. And I know we have gone quite a bit over, but I have one last question, which I think is a good one, and we'll conclude with this one, which is a technical question about how you deal with evidence regarding cash payments. And presumably that's when you don't have the receipts as well.
This is Valeria Sartorio from the Texas AG's office. One thing we've seen is we've been able to track some text messages between the victim and the notario. So while they may not have a receipt, they perhaps paid cash, there is communication where they're discussing the transfer of money. And so that's been helpful to us.
Mayerling, Rivera from the Manhattan DA's office. We've also gotten the perpetrator's bank records. Sometimes there's a cash deposit of the same amount on whatever date the victim is saying that they gave the money. We've also been successful with text messages, phone records, just phone calls between the perpetrator and the victims. You know, many times it's just bolstering the testimony of the victim. If they're saying they gave this person cash, and in addition to that, they have, you know, a cash withdrawal, there's a cash deposit, there are text messages, there are phone calls, then that adds to the victim's credibility in the story.
Yeah, and Kurt Zeager from Maryland, I just wanted to echo that. I think it's a credibility issue, and typically they're going to have some paperwork, and the paperwork is going to be completely ridiculous. And the story, you know, I think makes sense. You know, why would this certain suspect be handing all this strange paperwork with missing terms and so on and so forth? And a lot of times, if you ask them very specifically, do you remember where you got the cash, and did you get it out of the ATM, and test their memory and jog their memory, they'll remember. And the details are very, very helpful.
Kurt, can you also mention something about the money orders and how you were able to use money orders in a case?
Yeah, Western Union is fabulous because they keep everything. And we had a case involving a money order from Western Union, and we're able to subpoena those records. And it went back a number of years, but they keep everything in I guess like a PDF form, and so we were able to get that and figure out who signed it. And this lady there's another case that she had scratched off the agency where they're supposed to pay and just put her name on it, so that was particularly helpful.
Mayerling Rivera from the Manhattan DA, just to add to that, we had a case with Western Union and MoneyGram, where we were able to get video from their locations where the defendant actually went and picked up the money that was sent to them by the victims. So that was very helpful in identifying and corroborating.
You know, this is Rigo from LA. Ironically, in many cases, the scam artist gives us the information we need. When we contact them about a complaint that we receive, they send us a fake package telling us why they are justified in keeping the money and not doing much else for the consumer, because they claim they did a lot of work for them. And so in the documents they sent to us would be evidence clearly that the consumer was paying for those services that they weren't authorized to provide to begin with.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for indulging us in this extra 20 minutes. I apologize for the glitches on GoToWebinar, but I am hoping that you will be tuning in for any pieces that you may have missed by downloading the presentation and the recording from the ABA or ALIS Stop Notario Fraud website. I just want to end by thanking Debra, Tom, Mayerling, Rigo, Valeria, and Kurt for joining us today. They are very busy and they are very committed and passionate to this issue, and we're very fortunate to have them in the field. And many of you who are on the line, who are immigration advocates, seeing these clients come through your doors, please reach out and find out who your partner is in your area so that you can develop a relationship with them and create a ripple effect to really promote systemic change and to prevent future consumer harm. Thank you, and with that, we will close the webinar.